Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Vainam namaskritya naram chaiva nottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayamuddirayat. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should first offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of God Narayan, to Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, and to Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. Namaste Prayesh Bhadreshu, Nityam Bhagavata Seve, Bhagavat Utamashloke, Bhaktir Bhavati Naistik. So it's October 25th, 2020. We're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 7, entitled Scheduled Incarnations with Specific Functions. We're on text 47 of Chapter 7, Canto 2. Shashvat Prashantam Abhayam Pratibodhamatram Shudham Samam Satasata Paramatmatatvam Shabda Nat Yatra Pukarakabam Kriya Artha Maya Paraiti Abhimukhe Cha Vilajamana Tat Vai Padam Bhagavata Paramasya Pumsa Brahma Iti Yat Vidu Ajasra Sukham Vishokam Shashvat Prashantam Abhayam Pratibodhamatram Shudham Samam Sadasata Paramatmatatvam Shabdo Nayatra Pukarakavan Priyarto Maya Paretya Bimukhe Chavila Jamana Tad Vai Padam Bhagavata Paramasya Pumso Brahmeti Ad Vidurajas Rasukam Vishokam. Would someone else like to chant the verse?
Shashvat Prashantam Abhayam Pratibodhamatram
Shashvat Prashantam Abhayam Pratibodhamatram
Shodam Samam Sadashata Paramatmatatvam
Shudham Samam Sadasata Paramatmatatvam
Shabdo Nayatra Purukarvanam Kriyatarto
Shabdo Nayatra Pukarakavan Priyarto
Maya Prati Abhimuka Chavida Jamana
Maya Paretya Bimukhe Chavila Jamana
Tadvai Padam Bhagavata Paramasya Purusham
Tadvai Padam Bhagavata Paramasya Pumso
Rameti Yat Vidura Jasya Shukam Vishokam
Brahmeti yad vidurajasrasukam vishokam. Would anyone online like to chant?
Shashvat prasantam abhayam pratibodhamatram.
Shashvat prashantam abhayam pratibodhamatram.
Shudham samam sadasata paramatma tattvam.
Sudham samam sadasata paramatma tattvam.
Abdo nayatra purukara kavan kriyarto.
Abdo nayatra pukara kavan priyarto.
Maya paraitya vimuke chavilajamana.
Maya paretya vimuke cha vilajamana.
Advai padam bhagavata paramasya pumsu.
Tadvai padam bhagavata paramasya pumso.
Ameti advidurajas rasukam vishokam.
Rameti yad vidurajas rasukam vishokam.
Shashvat prashantam abhayam pratibodhamatram.
Shashvat prashantam abhayam pratibodhamatram.
Udam samam samasata paramatma tattvam.
Sudham samam sadasata paramatma tattvam.
Shabdo nayatra pukarava kavan kri. Shabdo nayatra pukara kavan kriyarto.
Shabdo nayatra pukara kavan kriyarto.
Maya paratya vimuke chavilajamana.
Maya paretya vimuke cha vilajamana.
Advai padam bhagavata paramasya pumso.
Advai padam bhagavata paramasya pumso.
Ameti yad vidurajasrasukam vishokam.
Rameti yad vidurajas rasukam vishokam. Would anyone else like to recite the verse?
Shashvat prasantam abhayam pratibodhamatram.
Shashvat prashantam abhayam pratibodhamatram.
Shudham samam sadasata paramatma tattvam.
Shudham samam sarasata paramatma tattvam.
Shabdo nayatra purukara kavan kriyarto.
Shabdo nayatra pukara kavan priyarto.
Maya paraiti abhimukhe chavijama vilajamana.
Maya paretya vimuke cha vilajamana.
Advai padam bhagavata paramasya pumso.
Tadvai padam bhagavata paramasya pumso.
Brahmeti yad vidurayashra sukham vishokam.
Prameti yad vidurajasra sukam vishokam. Shashvat, eternal. Prashantam, without disturbance. Abhayam, without fear. Pratibodhamatram, a consciousness opposed to the material counterpart. Shudham, uncontaminated. Samam, without distinction. Sat asata, of the cause and effect. Paramatma tattvam, the principle of primeval cause. Shabda, speculative sound. Na, not. Yatra, where there is. Puru karakavan, resulting in fruit of action. Kriya Artha, for the matter of sacrifice. Maya, illusion. Paraiti, flies away. Abhimukhe, in front of. Cha, also. Vilajamana, being ashamed of. Tat, that. Vai, is certainly. Padam, ultimate phase. Bhagavata, of the personality of Godhead. Paramasya, of the Supreme. Pumsa, of the person. Brahma, the Absolute. Iti, thus. Yat, which. Vidu, known as. Ajasra, unlimited. Sukham, happiness. Vishokam, without grief. Translation: what is realized as the absolute Brahman is full of unlimited bliss without grief. That is certainly the ultimate phase of the supreme enjoyer, the personality of Godhead. He is eternally void of all disturbances and fearless. He is complete consciousness as opposed to matter, uncontaminated and without distinctions. He is the principal primeval cause of all causes and effects, in whom there is no sacrifice for fruitive activities, and in whom the illusory energy does not stand. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The supreme enjoyer, the personality of Godhead, is the supreme Brahman, or the summum bonum, because of his being the supreme cause of all causes. The conception of impersonal Brahman realization is the first step due to his distinction from the illusory conception of material existence. In other words, impersonal Brahman is a feature of the Absolute, distinct from the material variegatedness, just as light is a conception distinct from its counterpart, darkness. But the light has its variegatedness, which is seen by those who further advance in the light. And thus the ultimate realization of Brahman is the source of the Brahman light, the supreme personality of Godhead, the summum bonum, or the ultimate source of everything. Therefore, meeting the personality of Godhead includes the realization of the impersonal Brahman as realized at first, in contrast with material inebriety. The personality of Godhead is the third step of Brahman realization. As explained in the first canto, one must understand all three features of the Absolute, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Pratibodhamatram is just the opposite conception of material existence. In matter, there are material miseries, and thus in the first realization of Brahman, there is the negation of such material inebrities, and there is a feeling of eternal existence distinct from the pangs of birth and death, disease and old age. That is the primary conception of impersonal Brahman. The Supreme Lord is the supreme soul of everything, and therefore in the supreme conception, affection is realized. The conception of affection is due to the relationship of soul to soul. A father is affectionate to his son because there is some relationship of nearness between the son and the father. But that sort of affection in the material world is full of inebriety. When the personality of Godhead is met, the fullness of affection becomes manifested because the reality of the affectionate relationship. He is not the object of affection by material tinges of body and mind, but he is the full, naked, uncontaminated object of affection for all living entities, because he is the super soul, or Paramatma, within everyone's heart. In the liberated state of affairs, the full-fledged affection for the Lord is awakened. As such, there is an unlimited flow of everlasting happiness without the fear of its being broken, as we have experienced here in the material world. The relationship with the Lord is never broken. Thus, there is no grief and no fear. Such happiness is inexplicable by words, and there can be no attempt to generate such happiness by fruitive activities, by arrangements and sacrifices. But we must also know that happiness, unbroken happiness exchanged with the Supreme Person, the personality of Godhead as described in this verse, transcends the impersonal conception of the Upanishads. In the Upanishads, the description is more or less negation of the material conception of things, but this is not denial of the transcendental senses of the Supreme Lord. Herein also the same is affirmed in the statements about the material elements. They are all transcendental, free from all contamination of material identification. And also the liberated souls are not devoid of senses. Otherwise, there cannot be any reciprocation of unhampered spiritual happiness exchanged between them in spontaneous, unbroken joy. All the senses, both of the Lord and of the devotees, are without material contamination. They are so because they are beyond the material cause and effects, as clearly mentioned herein, Satta Sata Param. The illusory material energy cannot work there, being ashamed before the Lord and his transcendental devotees. In the material world, the sense activities are not without grief, but here it is clearly said that the senses of the Lord and the devotees are without any grief. There is a distinct difference between the material and spiritual senses, and one should understand it without denying the spiritual senses because of a material conception. The senses in the material world are surcharged with material ignorance. In every way, the authorities have recommended purification of the senses from the material conception. In the material world, the senses are manipulated for individual and personal satisfaction, whereas in the spiritual world, the senses are properly used for the purpose for which they were originally meant, namely the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. Such sensual activities are natural, and therefore sense gratification there is uninterrupted and unbroken by material contamination, because the senses are spiritually purified. And such satisfaction of the senses is equally shared by the transcendental reciprocators. Since the activities are unlimited and constantly increasing, there is no scope for material attempts or artificial arrangements. Such happiness of transcendental quality is called Brahma Sakyam, which will be clearly described in the 5th canto. Om Ganat Mirandasya Gananjana Shalakani Chakshura Anvalitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guru Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Sarasvati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine. Hare Krishna. This is Brahma speaking to Narada Muni. And Brahma's, he's not just, he's describing different phases of the absolute. Vedanti tat tatvad vidas tat pamyajganaman bayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabdite. Learned transcendentalists realize the absolute, or the learned transcendentalists call the absolute in 3 ways: Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. In the word for word, Padam is defined as the ultimate phase. So Bhagavan, so it's an order of completeness. There's Brahman, which is Brahman, Brahma-Jyoti realization. It's characterized by relief from material misery, relief from the miseries of being entangled in the modes of nature and lust and greed and hankering and lamentation. Okay, so that's a nice transcendence. Okay, then more complete is Paramatma realization. And Dantarasta Paramanu Shantarasta. There's an expansion of Vishnu. Vishnu is an expansion of Krishna. There's an expansion of Vishnu called Paramatma within every atom. Sarvasya Chaham Vidisa Nivisto, within the heart of all living entities. And then the most complete, the ultimate phase of the absolute is Bhagavan Sri Krishna. So Brahma is describing this, and he's describing it not just from an intellectual cognitive point of view. He's sharing his experience. One thing Brahma's well known for is his Govindam prayers. Govindam prayers. And this is like, okay, in the Vedic culture, that there's different schools of philosophy, and they're also actually called darshans, Vedanta darshan, Bhagavat darshan. Darshan means to have a direct meeting, a direct experience. And so the actual purpose of education, not that I got this from Greenberg Elementary School, or Northeast High School, or Penn State University, but the purpose of education is to have a direct experience of the absolute. That's the actual purpose. And what we have in the Bhagavatam, in Bhagavad Gita, we're focusing on Bhagavatam, is we have personalities, Brahma, Vyasadeva, Shukadev Goswami, because this is Brahma speaking, and it's being narrated by Shukadev Goswami, and that's being narrated by Suta Goswami, and that's all being narrated by Srila Vyasadeva. So this is their personal experience. We sometimes talk about foundational principles for conscious living. Experience our experience and communicate it so others get it. So that's so of course there's descriptions. There's descriptions of philosophy and ontology and epistemology. And importantly, that all of these parts of the Bhagavatam, they're these transcendental persons, Brahma, Shukadev Goswami, Srila Vyasadeva, and they're sharing their realization. They're sharing their direct experience of the absolute. Their direct experience of the absolute. That's why we say with full confidence, every line in Prabhupada's purports, this is Bhagavatam. This is just like, okay, Brahma sharing with Narada. So Shukadeva Goswami, he shared his direct experience of the absolute there on the bank of the Ganges with Maharaj Parikshit and the sages. And Sukadeva Goswami same Namesharanya. So Prabhupada called his purports his personal ecstasies. It's his personal, direct, realized experience of the absolute. That's why Prabhupada's purports. They're purports on the Bhagavatam, and they are the Bhagavatam. And okay, so Brahman's known for his Brahma Samhita. The Brahma Samhita, it's I think 62 verses, then there's 27 verses in the middle there that all end with Govinda Madi Pusham Tamaham Bhajami. So that's Brahma having a direct realization, it's not theoretical, of Govinda, Premanjana Charita Bhakti Vilochanena Shantarashadeva Hridayeshu Vilokan Yam Sham Sundaram Achincha Gunasvarupam Govinda Madi Pusham Tamaham Bhajami. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, the first progenitor, who was Shamasundar, Krishna himself, possessing innumerable transcendental attributes, and whom the pure devotees see in their heart of hearts with the eyes of devotion tinged with the salve of love. Chintam ni prakarasad masukalpa vriksha laksha viteshu surabir abhipalayantam lakshmi sahasra satasam brahmasi yamanam govinda madi pusham tamaham bhajami. So these are Brahmas. He's directly realizing, as Prabhupada says here, soul to soul, in a relationship of affection, soul to soul. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, the first progenitor, who is tending the cows, yielding all desires and abodes built of spiritual gems, surrounded by millions of purpose trees, and served with great reverence and affection by hundreds and thousands of Lakshmis or gopis. Venum Kranantam Aravinda Dalai Taksham Barhavatamsam Asitam Buddha Sundarangam. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, with blooming eyes like lotus petals, and who's adept at playing on his flute, blooming eyes like lotus petals, with head bedecked with peacock feather, whose figure of beauty is tinged with the hue of dark blue rain clouds, and whose unique loveliness is charming millions of cupids. So these are descriptions of Bhagavan, the most complete realization of the absolute. It includes Paramatma and Brahma-Gyoti. So this is Brahma's realization, and this is Vyasadeva, the compiler of Bhagavatam. Bhagavatam was compiled, written by Srila Vyasadeva in the mature fruit of his literary career, we might say. And he wrote that so that people who in this age would be confused by the Vedas, they wouldn't get the conclusion. He gave us the Bhagavatam. And this purport, Prabhupada's purport, it really gives us insight into Vyasadev's realization. So this is because someone can say, well, here I read this Veda, it says that. Well, here's a verse in Bhagavad Gita, it says that. And here in this section, it says that. So it's so confusing. It doesn't need to be confusing at all, because it's important to understand whatever, because naturally different aspects of the absolute are going to be presented in different ways at different times. And we want to understand it. We want to understand it within the context of what's the realization, what's the direct experience of the absolute of these personalities who are the speakers, who are giving us Bhagavatam. It's described about Srila Vyasadeva. Bhakti yogena manasi samyak pranihite male apashya purusham purnam mayam chatad apashram. So it's described that Vyasadeva, he realized 5 elements. It's described here how like Maya, the energy of Maya, felt embarrassed. So Vyasadeva had this vision that, okay, he had this vision just like Brahma, not just a vision, not like some fantasy or a drug-induced hallucination. He had direct experience, soul-to-soul experience of Bhagavan Sri Krishna, who's, as just described here in this verse, who's never influenced by Maya, never influenced by Maya. Maya is standing at his back. Maya is standing at his back. And Vyasadev's realization, just like Brahma's realization is described here, is 3 aspects of the absolute. Brahman, more complete; Paramatma, most complete; Bhagavan, Bhagavan Sri Krishna, Govinda. And an aspect of a phase of the absolute, the jiva, spirit, soul, that's us, is not included in that. Is not included in the absolute. The jiva, spirit, soul, we are, this is Vyasadeva, we are servants of the absolute. And we tend to get bewildered in illusion. We allow ourselves to get bewildered in illusion by the illusory energy, by Maya, by the 3 modes of nature. We enter, we connect with the process of bhakti, and we experience relief from being in the tight grips of the modes of material nature. So 5 elements: matter or Maya, who's standing kind of on the shadow of Krishna, the backside of Bhagavan Sri Krishna, Maya, Jiva, and then Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagavan. And that's in order of more and more completeness. So this is the direct. So anything we read in the Bhagavatam or the Vedas must be understood and processed in the context of the direct realization of the compilers, writers, and speakers of the Vedas, like Vyasadeva, Brahma, Shukadev Goswami. Yeah. So the realization here. So the realization is it's one of very personal affection. That's what's emphasized here. One of very, very personal affection. Right? So Prabhupada writes, the conception of affection. The Supreme Lord is the supreme soul of everything. And therefore, in the supreme conception, affection is realized. The conception of affection is due to the relationship of soul to soul. A father is affectionate to his son because there's some relationship of nearness between the son and the father. So this is very, very beautiful descriptions. Okay. Right. So in the ultimate absolute, it's not that we give up affection. No, the soul's core affection awakens. So this is, there's a purport in the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Krishna, well, in that verse, Krishna is describing a bit about the spiritual world. That's expanded so much in the Bhagavatam. And in the purport, Prabhupada writes, one should be captivated by this information. Right? And Prabhupada's like, you see, he's completely captivated by the information. It's a personal ecstasy. And he's like trying to lovingly like shake us. You should be excited about this. Is that what? I'm just reading the book here. What? So it's like, you should be captivated about this information. Okay. And that this conception of the absolute ultimate enlightenment, this is ever increasing personal ecstasy. We can see everyone in the world. Everyone's looking for some sort of ananda, some sort of bliss, some sort of joy through relationship. Okay. There's a key verse in Bhagavad Gita, key verse, Prabhupada references it a lot. Vitaragabhaya Manmana Mam Upashrita. So Krishna says, for those who have given up material attachment and given up fear and anger and become attached to me, they achieve great love for me, great affection, they exchange affection with me. So Prabhupada goes into the psychology of spiritual life in his purport there. And he describes different mental states, different psychologies that get in the way of making this supreme soul-to-soul exchange of affection our goal. And it's important to tonight, what's our goal? What's our purpose? Spirit, whether it's spiritual life, material life. I think there was a video that Damayanti made. Let's say I think it was a talk I gave at your place a few years ago. And yes, just someone's wandering around and say, who are you? I don't know. Where you going? Don't know. Where you come from? I don't know. Okay, so we'd be concerned about such a person. We'd be concerned. Okay, so spiritually, that's the condition of almost everyone. So that's why we have, where I ask rhetorically, where is there a more sublime philosophy to really support us to arrive at meaningful, fulfilling responses to these questions? Something more intellectually satisfying. What is the Lord in the heart? What is the Supreme Personality of God. What does matter? What is the Jiva soul? And so, and just like, otherwise we could be driving. It's just like, should I go faster? Well, I don't know if I don't even know if I'm on the right road. I don't even know what road I'm supposed. Should I slow down? Well, I want to get there. So there's a path. There's a path chalked out here. There's a path chalked out. It's called bhakti. Prabhupada references it intensely in the purport here. And so with this Prabhupada ends the purport with, such happiness of transcendental quality is called Brahma Sokyam, which will be clearly described in the 5th canto. So the idea from that Gita verse in the 4th chapter, 4.10, is that, well, if we're just attached to material relationships, material means God is not in the center. If we're attached to material sense gratification, gross or subtle sense gratification is like, I want to be recognized. Or at least I don't want her or him to be as recognized as they are. We're filled with envy and jealousy. Then we're not going to get real intentional and determined, because that envy, that attachment will get in our way. We're not going to get determined to really awaken that core affection of the soul for the Supreme Personality of Godhead and all of the living entities, soul to soul. That is stress, soul to soul. And then also fear, because the idea is, well, in this experience, we've, as Prabhupada mentions in the purport, right, that we endeavor for joy and bliss in relationships, and it's full of inebriety. Maybe there's some gratification, but quickly it becomes poisonous. It becomes full of resentment and like that. So we have a lot of frustration and exasperation. So then the idea, okay, when you achieve eternal enlightenment, there's more relationships. Isn't that great? So in material reactivity, we could go, no way. I don't, if in eternity, I want to get rid of relationships. I've had enough of that. Thank you very much. So that's why Brahma here in the Brahma Samhita, Alola Chandrakunda Satvana Malya Vamsi Ratnangaram Pranakili Kalavilasam Shamam Chubangam Lalita Niyata Prakasham Govinda Madi Puja Tamaham Bhajamya. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who has a flower garland around his neck, beautified by the moon locket, with hands ornamented and decorated with beautiful jewels, and the flute, who always revels in pastimes of love, and whose threefold bending form of Shyama Sundar, graceful bending form of Shyama Sundar as eternal manifest. So Bhagavatam, Krishna book, Brahma Samhita, the idea is like, this is a completely different dimension. It's a completely different paradigm of relationships. You can't take the material frustration and apply it there. This is a completely different quality of relationship, completely different quality of form, completely different quality of activity. Okay, so so for my spiritual goal, do I simply want relief from material misery, which is no small achievement? In a sense, we focus a lot on like experience my experience, communicate my experience, to accept, to accept. To accept. That means like empathy with myself, acceptance. To notice my experience of sensation, of thought, of emotion. We just discussed the past few days, chapter 1 of Bhagavad Gita. It's so much about Arjuna experiencing his experience of physical sensation, of feeling, of thought. So that in a sense, that's like a form of Brahman realization. I'm not hankering that I should be experiencing something else. I'm not lamenting that I lost what I was experiencing. It's a form of Brahman realization. And so, we can look at, all right, so the Bhagavatam, Lord Brahma, he's saying, this is a possible goal if you want it. This ever increasing blissful relationship that's a completely different dimension of anything material you've ever tasted. Completely different dimension. It's not like 10 times better than the material happiness or 100. It's a completely different paradigm with no inebrities, no grief, no resentment. Of course, there's transcendental emotion. That's a different dimension. So they're urging us, adopt this path, make this your mission. Get determined, get intentional to enter into this most complete direct realization of this ultimate phase of the absolute. And so in the last line of the verse of the purport, Prabhupada's referencing a text from the 5th canto of Bhagavatam, spoken by Lord Rishabhadev to his sons, headed by Bharat Maharaj. And that verse is, Nayam deho deham bhajam riloke kastan kamanaharti vid bhujanye tapo divyam puchakina satam shudyadhyasmad brahma sokyam tvananta. And that says, like in the human form of life, don't settle for the sorts of so-called enjoyment that's available to the stool eaters, the pigs and the dogs. Don't settle for temporary gratification of the senses that will never fulfill the soul. Go for nourishment of the soul. And there's 3 phases of that: Brahman realization, Paramatma, Bhagavan realization. They're all transcendental to material misery and happiness, enjoyment and suffering. And Bhagavan realization affords and opens up for the spirit soul that a name for Krishna that we read this morning before japa is Rasa Vigraha. Namo Chintani Krishna's Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha. Purna Shiva Nityamukta Binavan Nama Namina. That Bhagavan, the source of all rasa, the source of all relationship, the source of all flavors. It's not just one monotonous, undifferentiated oneness. Okay. So the urging is, go for that. That's the real taste of the bliss of the soul. Rasa Vigraha. Yes. And as Prabhupada often emphasized, that Rasa Vigraha, that Krishna, the source and the reservoir of all affectionate relationships in perfection, in completeness, without any inebriety. Prabhupada uses that word without any inebriety, is completely present in his name. And there's many ways to approach Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead. And you might say that the most accessible is through this chanting, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And this verse from the 5th canto that Prabhupada references, it says that human life is meant for voluntarily performing tapo divyam, divine austerity, voluntarily performing divine austerity. Okay? That's, in other forms of life, that's not possible. In animals, plants, time to eat, we eat. I feel sleeping, we sleep. Time for sex, time to fight, then it's fighting. It's not like, I think I'll fast today for some spiritual energy. Okay. So we might think, well, austerity, that's not a very warm and fuzzy word. Austerity, I don't want austerity. We can think of another word, but the idea, it's like, it doesn't matter whether you want it or not. You're doing austerity. I'm doing austerity. I haven't met anyone who's not doing. Everyone's struggling. Everyone's doing austerity. The question is, what is a worthwhile struggle? So you did she gets Sakyam Brahma, that Tapu Divam Puchakina Sattvam, that to voluntarily do austerity means to give up some immediate gratification for enduring spiritual bliss, for this exchange of affection between the soul and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Do austerity that will take us to that bliss that will never be crushed by time. If someone wants to build a business, they're struggling, they're doing an austerity. If someone wants to get a PhD, if someone wants to become expert in a craft or a sport or a musical instrument, they're going to do austerity. It means I'm going to practice. I'm going to give time to study these books. Okay? So giving up something immediate, because then I'll be an accomplished musician. Oh, then I'll be a recognized scholar, and that will be a greater fulfillment than just partying every night or whatever it is. So the recommendation of the sages here in the Bhagavatam of Lord Brahma, direct our inviolable propensity for austerity in such a way that we'll get that Brahma Sakyam, that's what's described, Brahma Sakyam, Shuddhyatasma, Brahma Sakyam Tvanantam, ever increasing spiritual bliss. Okay, so Hare Krishna, thanks for listening, thanks for your presence, thank you very much. I welcome if anyone wants to ask any questions or share any comments or realizations. Bhakti and Brielle.
So I understand the forms of Dharma are austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness, and we only have truthfulness in Kali Yuga. So is there like a, maybe this is a silly question, but is there like a point to teach people austerity if that's one of the legs of Dharma that aren't existing anymore in Kali Yuga? I mean, I think it's wonderful to teach austerity, but I'm just wondering, is it like a fruitless cause because that leg is already ripped off the bowl of Dharma and Kali Yuga?
Thanks for your question. I just want to do a sound check. Did you hear Brielle? Not much. Okay. I'm going to repeat your question. Okay. So she said, well, the kind of sub-religious principles, mercy, cleanliness, and truthfulness and austerity, the only one really active in Kali Yuga is truthfulness. So austerity is not really much appreciated. So is it kind of a useless endeavor to try to talk about austerity and, teach austerity? Right. So, well, because that's the thing that we don't need to be. We don't want to be resigned to a Kali Yuga consciousness, right? Yeah, we don't need to be resigned to a Kali Yuga consciousness. We don't need to just go with that downward spiral flow. And there is austerity in Kali Yuga, but as far as austerity for truly worthy purposes, that's rarer and rarer. So we don't need to be a product of the nature and the nurture of Kali Yuga. Transformation is possible. Prabhupada would sometimes refer to his students as Vaikuntha men and Vaikuntha women, Vaikuntha children. Okay, so well, this is Kali Yuga. Well, that's the whole thing. Spirit soul has free will, and I can choose Satya Yuga consciousness. I can choose Goloka Vrindavan consciousness. I don't want to make it seem light and frivolous, but like choosing Satya Yuga consciousness, choosing Vaikuntha consciousness means I'm going to Saint Augustine says a habit, if not resisted, will become necessity. So we got all these Kali Yuga toxic habits, Kali Yuga ignorant habits, right? So basically, but in the human form, we got free will. It was like, I'm going to resist the Kali Yuga habits that maybe I've been absorbed in for a long, long time. Certainly this lifetime, probably longer. I'm going to resist the climate of Kali Yuga, and I'm choosing divine austerity. And it's made somewhat easy for us through our current link to the Parampara Srila Prabhupada, because otherwise on our own, because it's yeah, there's a lot of attempts at spiritual movements, and yes, I don't want to just go with this degraded materialism, consumerism, and war and like that. But then how to really take a stand that makes a difference and doesn't really contribute more to the problem. We can give some examples of that. So we get this guidance coming from Brahma down the disciplic succession from Srila Prabhupada. Current link means he's the Acharya. He's our Acharya for the age, meaning like, okay, here's austerities that are kind of reasonable for you to do, where you can really take a stand to be part of the golden age and not part of the terrible storm of Kali Yuga. So yeah, you want to speak loud so everyone can hear.
Okay. And the next question is, because truthfulness is the leg of Dharma that's still standing, would it make sense to try to support people to connect with austerity through the avenue of truthfulness? Like, for example, helping them raise awareness about the truth of their experience.
Yeah.
Like I think of with habit change, when someone's in that first stage of habit change, like the only thing that we can really help them with is to raise awareness of their habit and how it's affecting them. So the truthfulness is the way towards. People aren't that inspired to do austerity, but it requires that truthfulness first to get there.
Thanks for that. Yeah, that is so much. That is so much sattva. Yeah, that's so much like our attempt, our approach to meeting people where they're at, and so that's why we so much, whether it's in our books or our programs, let's just look at the truth of myself. Assert your truth, because truth it's appreciated. Austerity, like who wants that? Even though everyone's doing it, or even mercy like that is just the idea of just to be vicious towards the animals and just accept it. Oh, that's fine. But truth is pretty much appreciated. So that's where we start. And then that to be truthful requires some austerity, right? Even like to create a sacred space where it's just like, oh, with this person, this is actually a safe place for me to admit the truth to myself and reveal the truth. That means do the austerity, avoid the roadblocks to communication. So there's some austerity there too. Okay. Thanks for that. Malini.
Hare Krishna. There is something that's often I meditate on and I think of in terms of austerity and karma. And I just want to share and see where you go with it. But I'm thinking like we have a certain amount of happiness and distress according to our karma. And austerity, in a sense, is voluntarily accepting a level of distress in some ways, in more than one way. The distress of getting up in the morning or not eating what I want to eat. And I think of that also in terms of other things like therapy and good, anything that's in a mode of goodness therapy. And I'm thinking, is it that when we do austerity and accept some level of distress, that counts for part of our distress karma? Let's say that we graphically, we put like a certain an amount of something like, let's say, balls in a jar.
Yeah.
So amount of distress, pain we are supposed to have in that jar. And then is it that when we do austerity, because we voluntarily accept suffering in some ways, we kind of take care of one of those balls?
Thank you, Melanie. Thanks for sharing and asking. Well, my understanding is the answer is yes, and I like your imagery and analogy there, because this idea of like the happiness and the stress, it's kind of predestined according to the karma that we created. But the idea is Yantruvudani Mayaya, that okay, like we're on a machine and material energy. Our particular machine is this body that we're in. And of course, and that machine will just go like a spirit soul acts in a certain way, gets a karma in the body of a dog, it's going to bark. It's going to bark. Okay. And then the dog will have its life cycle. So we're in a particular machine. But in the human form, we can change the machine. We can change the mixture of the modes that we identify with. And then we're on a different machine. And that machine has a particular happiness and distress. In the human form, we can change the mixture of the modes that we're attached to. So yeah, and an example comes to me to support what you're asserting or what you're asking. Like, okay, so let's say according to my karma, I'm born in a meat-eating family, not by accident. That was my karma. Okay, okay. So then there's a particular. Okay. There's some particular enjoyment for some souls in material conditioning to taste blood and flesh. And then there's particular suffering, maybe around health, maybe around that pain I'm causing to animals that's coming back to me, like that. Okay, so for someone who's conditioned to eat meat like that, so then I'm making a choice. I'm going to do an austerity. I'm going to not do that immediate gratification. Of course, for someone who's not eating meat, then it's a terrible torture to put such things in the mouth. But I just let in the consciousness of someone who's accustomed to eat meat. So I'm going to do that austerity, and then there's some distress, you might say. Oh, I'm not going to eat that steak or hamburger or chicken or like that. I'm not going to do that. So there's some distress. And then, as you said, kind of like I've taken some of I've reduced my distress points, right? And so, okay, but now in the future, so now I have spiritually and materially healthy. I'm not implicated in the pain caused to animals. So because I changed my modes in relation to my, food choices, then I've, did that austerity. So yeah, and of course, in that area of food, the karma-free choice is called prashadam. Thank you, Molly.
Just want to expand on what I was sharing and appreciate your sharing, and it brings more thoughts. And I'm thinking about so much of the society, the way the society is organized, more and more than when I was a child, for sure. There is so much avoidance of pain. Like everything is about avoiding pain, avoiding physical pain. If we hurt, we have some right away. The first thing people do is painkiller. I remember having pain, going to the hospital and really expecting them to just, help me to see what was wrong with my body or what's the solution or anything. And then they will send me home with painkiller and feeling so disappointed. Like that's not what I wanted. And so society is so much about painkiller. So it seems that through the painkiller, it's the jar doesn't get emptied in a sense. Yeah. And it that it will bring even more miseries.
Yeah.
When I'm looking at healing also, like the Sattvic way of healing, it contains a lot of austerity and maybe pain, like even a good massage that, it contains some level of pain. And I was also thinking like, okay, that level of pain that I'm accepting, for example, to a massage, there is pain involved. Is it in a sense part of the pain, the physical pain that I'm destined to receive, but because I'm choosing to receive it now in a certain way, I'm not going to receive it in a different way that will be like unpredictable and kind of, yeah, like that.
Yeah, I appreciate your realizations and thank you. You mentioned physical pain, also emotional pain. Yeah, because the idea is, okay, take this psychiatric medication, right, to numb the emotional pain instead of experiencing the pain of the shame, the pain of the rage, experiencing it, being awake to the message that's there for my growth, experiencing my experience, and dedicating myself to growth, to austerity that will support growth. Instead of that, oh, okay, just take this pill and maybe it numbs the pain, and then maybe that pain will take 40 years to play out instead of 4 minutes. And so we're really in the name of immediate relief from misery, we're perpetuating the misery. And same, we could take it on a grander level. Like the idea is, okay, death and old age and disease are painful. So, okay, so death, old age. So the idea is, you gotta get them to the nursing home. You gotta get them to the nursing home. Okay, because we don't want to look at people. We don't want to look at people who are no fun anymore. Whereas in more traditional ancient societies, then I was living in Arab villages just about 30 years ago, and the lifestyle in many respects was about the same as it was 1,000 years ago. And I remember I went to one door when I was in the Arab villages, and I saw in the back there was a Christian Arab village, and it was a Christian home in the village of Rama. And the man of the household answered, and there in the corner there was obviously someone dying, but there was no consciousness like there would be in most places in the West. Oh, gotta get him to a nursing home. Gotta hide that pain. Gotta hide that pain. So then death, old age, disease, these things are present, and it helps us to get serious about the actual goal of life, of self-realization. We hide the pain, we're perpetuating our pain in the cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. Hare Krishna. Ramachandra,
Speaking about
if you could speak loud enough for everyone to hear.
Speaking about all these austerities, like I just kind of wanted to point to something that I highlighted in the text, and I was wondering what's the connection to all of that, because there's towards the end, Prophet says how such sensual activities are natural, and therefore sense purification there is uninterrupted and unbroken by material contamination, because the senses are spiritually purified. And I guess it's about the spiritual world.
Yeah.
And I always thought that there's no sense purification. Spiritual.
It's spiritual sense gratification. Yeah. Yeah. Uninterrupted, without inebriation, right? He's talking about the sense, like when Krishna says prajakshavagamam dharmyam shushakam kartamir, this process is directly experienced. He's talking about through the spiritual senses. That this is such an amazing purport. We could easily spend a full week on this purport. Mm-hmm. So probably these are soul to soul, and that's what Brahma's talking about. So the soul has eyes. The soul has a tongue, the soul has hands, the soul has legs. The soul is eager to exchange affection. Here we're doing it like through this kind of shadow filter. Yeah. So Prabhupada's talking about, and in order to get to that pure, complete, ever expansively blissful with joy without inebriation, it means we need to do the austerity of gradually giving up attachment to the shadow form, giving up attachment to the shadow form. Mm-hmm. Hare Krishna.
Could I just to continue that for my own process? I'm kind of seeing just from what you guys just expressed that. So we're activating our spiritual senses and we're deactivating our material senses.
Yeah.
So there's a difference. There's a difference there.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I wasn't really, I wasn't thinking in that context before, so I'm kind of appreciating that. Okay, there's a distinction.
It's essentially that, and I like how you phrased it succinctly. Yeah. Our spiritual in Bhakti Yoga, we are deactivating our material senses and we're bringing alive our spiritual senses. Yeah. Hare Krishna. Any other comments, questions, sharing?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Daniel.
I guess the thing that's on my mind in reference to this conversation is imperceptibility of our senses being eroded. So, I mean, I don't know. I just feel like with the amount of technology that we're inundated with and the way, like the very corrosive, like, I don't know, just the insidious way that it distracts us and it becomes more and more alive in the way that it tries to manipulate us.
Yeah.
It's not a tool. Like a tool sits on a shelf and waits to be used. And technology doesn't do that. Technology is requesting and demanding and inviting and
It's very intrusive.
Yes. It's intrusive and it has intelligent designs and there's some sort of like, they design these supercomputers now with all this artificial intelligence backed to try and emulate, some sort of creativity for capturing our interest, finding out all of our amount of time that we spend on the screen and what we click on. And there's a huge amount of human endeavor that's been released into these computer codes that really have the ability to like figure things out for us, like where we go and what we like to shop and do, and then harness all that power to really stimulate us in a way that's not for our benefit. And I'm hearing like more and more lately about how people are having difficulty disassembling themselves from this trap in a way that's eroding the way that they are, like changing their programming, changing their, like we were talking about earlier about the mixture of the machine, how you can elevate yourself to have a better machine. I feel like there's a tendency for this technology trap to erode us into like a worse state, like a more conditioned state.
That's the goal, to send us into that downward spiral of the darkness and ignorance and hatred and duality of Kali Yuga consciousness. That's pretty much the consciousness behind everything being produced. I mean, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but mostly. So therefore, if we want to just keep our head above water, what to speak of actually making progress to swim to shore, to get on the lifeboat. If we want just to keep our head above water, we need to be taking a strong stand. It's like, well, I didn't plan to fall deeply into Maya. It's not enough to not plan. We need to have determined, intentional plans to maintain, increase, and deepen and strengthen our Krishna consciousness. Otherwise we'll be overwhelmed. How long will it take for us to get overwhelmed? About a nanosecond. So that's the thing. Like, I mean, especially in the age of screens, where who is not addicted? So we need to like really have that. In Bhagavad Gita, the term is used, drita vrataha. Drita, I believe the English word determined comes from drita. Vrat means a vow. So we use the term clear intention, consciousness, and we need to have that determined vow just to break even at the end of the day. Okay, and Prabhupada helps us, like, okay, just at least 16 rounds per day to help you break even. And if we want to really make progress on a given day, then like, because yeah, or yeah, more rounds, Bhagavatam, programs, kirtan, whatever it takes, and realizing where I'm weak and susceptible to fall into foolishness, and set up safeguards and coaching and accountability checks, because otherwise the basic energy of the technology, of the entertainment, and and even like even the modes of the entertainment compared to the 60s or 70s. I mean, Kali Yuga is progressing pretty quick on downhill, and so we need to be just staunchly determined. Otherwise, we'll get overwhelmed in a moment. So it's a vital caution.
That speaks to the austerity for me, because what if I tell someone I pray for 2 hours a day? It's not good feedback. If I tell them I've watched half a season of a television show, they're like, oh, I've been there, I've done that. And it's austerity. I mean, it feels good to be unplugged and plugged into a machine and, just scrolling mindlessly through whatever, or even here's the other thing, David, like I will sit there and have these amazing discussions with people all day long, on the internet, like listening to like great, things that are happening and seeing like amazing things that are occurring. And then I'm like, where am I? Am I really with those people? Like, am I having real interactions with anyone? And I feel like COVID-19 is making it worse. Like it's an illusion of connection. So I really like your emphasis on chanting the rounds, because we really are connected when we're chanting, and really refocusing on the program that Prabhupada outlines for us, because that is really breaking the cycle.
Yeah.
Hare Krishna, thank you for that.
Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, and then so we're taking some stand. We're using technology for a few hours this morning to discuss Bhagavatam and chant japa. So that's taking a stand that intrinsically, this is also this is Krishna's energy, and so we're using it to serve our spiritual awakening, serve Prabhupada's mission. So it can be done. And with that, I appreciate the caution. And again, so like, yeah, Prabhupada's giving us a basic program. There's never any force. We can accept, embrace whatever of it we want. And his program is, to the extent that you perform austerities in this container, then you'll not just keep your head above water, you'll actually get on the lifeboat back home, back to Vrindavan. Sarah.
Hare Krishna, I was just appreciating what you said about this is Krishna's energy too, the material energy. And then in the purport today, it was saying about the material energy being ashamed before the Lord. And I was just curious about that, because I feel like my mother Maya is doing her service, and I wonder who is ashamed or what's happening there.
Okay, thanks for that. And I like how you say Mother Maya. I appreciate your question. So yeah, so this is, so Maya is a person. She's Kali, she's Durga, she's superintendent of the prison house. She's doing a wonderful service for Krishna. She's doing an important service for Krishna. But she also has some shame. She's doing her service, and she's an intimate devotee of Krishna. But also she has some shame because, and this is very, if we want to get into it personally, because her service is to keep us entangled in nonsense degraded internet 14 hours per day. That's her service. And it is her service because she's just reciprocating with our desire to forget Krishna and this and that. And so this is her austerity. Thank you, Rukmini. Right. So in one sense, of course she's doing her service. And her service is to keep us when a spirit soul truly takes a strong stand, breaks out of Maya, declares war against Maya, and becomes a pure devotee of Krishna, she celebrates. She offers them a flower garland. She celebrates. She's so happy. But her service is to keep us entrapped in stupidity and foolishness and deception. So even though it is her service, she still feels some like, I kind of sorry I need to do this to you, but so that's my understanding of what's going on. She is a great devotee, and she does experience some, I'll call it some spiritual shame, because kind of like, I'm sorry I need to do this to you, unlimited trillions of spirit souls, but it is my service. So she feels a little like that. That's my understanding.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you all. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.